say, just framing again for folks, you know, the design circles are part of the Family Leadership Design Collaborative, and have these circles going across what we're calling our apaturas, which are really focused on different areas and opportunities for growth and sort of expansion of thinking about family engagement and family leadership, and sort of transforming issues around racial equity and racial inequities, broadly conceived. And, you know, we're doing things, just to give some framing, that we have lots of different circles going with very different foci and sort of scales in mind, from, you know, folks who are working in really just community centers that aren't even very connected to schools, but trying to think about what is family leadership in their communities, towards folks that are working with state and district and leadership. So really different scales, and that's by design, just to say that. We are being pretty deliberate about trying to think through and develop different contexts where theories of change around racial equity and family leadership can be played out, and we can learn from a range of communities and a range of contexts. So this is our second conversation about design circles.
One other thing that I would add just also is that we just had this discussion about sort of these time frames of change and where people are entering in this process in the design circles, and where that will go in 3 or 4. And so there's also a real range, I think, and this came up in the last WebDialogue, where there are some folks who are just starting something completely that hasn't, a set of conversations that haven't existed, or relationships that haven't existed before. And there are some folks that are building on things that have been building for many years. Other folks have stuff that has started and is sort of moving to a next phase, which is kind of what I think Camille is going to talk about a little bit. So there's also sort of different, not only do we have really different kinds of contexts, but also different time trajectories in terms of where folks are at, and where the design circles are in some ways almost like stepping into different points in that time stream for different groups. Can we do a quick round of introductions then?
Sure. Where do you want to start?
Should we start? Maybe we should start on the electronic end. You guys want to?
I'll go. I'm Gerardo Lopez. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy at the University of Utah.
And I'm Ana Olivia Palazzo Angulo, the Salem Kaiser Coalition for Equality in Salem, Oregon.
I'm Camille Wilson at the University of Michigan in Educational Foundations, Leadership and Policy.
Megan, I think everybody knows Megan. Anne, I think everyone knows me.
I'm Charlene. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Washington in Learning Sciences and Human Development.
I'm Nancy, in first-year doctoral student in Curriculum and Instruction.
Melanie, a first-year PhD student in Policy, Organizations, and Leadership.
I'm Amber. I'm a doctoral candidate also in Education, Policy, Organizations, and Leadership.
Mario, second-year PhD student in Learning Sciences and Human Development.
Hi, I'm Aditi. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in Policy, Organizations, and Leadership.
Can I make a request? Could you send me a list of, and all of us, a list of these, of all of you, but with your, not just your name, but, you know, what position and where you're from, like who you represent, like the university and PhD and all that. PhD of what and all that. Do you mind?
Sure. Are the folks on this end?
Because I can never remember fast enough, and I would love to.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
I'm very interested in the PhD of education policy, that area. You know, I'm just interested in connecting more.
Great. Yeah, we could do that for sure. Okay. So today, Camille is going to share a little bit about her design circle in Detroit, and I assume, you know, probably give us a little bit of context for the work they've been doing and where they're at. And then we wanted to just have one person go because we have noticed that we run out of time in terms of being able to gauge. So being able to have some time to dialogue and ask questions and get into conversation.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I'll give you some background on this group and our work and kind of lead you into the design circle. So overall, I'm working with a community-based organization in Detroit of education organizers, and they are both parents and non-parents for the most part, family members and non-parental, non-family members, all Detroiters. It's a multiracial coalition, predominantly African-American, but definitely not exclusively, and that's by intention as well. In particular, you have good representation of African-American, white, and Latino specifically. I will say, just FYI, one group that is noticeably absent is Muslim and Arabic speaking. And that's really important, I think, to the context of Detroit, but that's kind of a side note, but something that I have in the back of my mind sometimes. So this group started themselves a couple of years ago in response to the very complicated and contested educational landscape of Detroit, which includes a public school district that is one of the lowest performing in the country, a city that has second to New Orleans, the largest population of charter schools, including for-profit charter schools, and also a whole cadre of schools that are under state takeover. So there's just a lot of stuff going on in the city, and the achievement, performance rates of all those schools are pretty abysmal, with just tons of inequity, some of which I imagine that you may have heard about because it's made national news regularly, between teacher walkouts and dilapidated buildings and continual turnover. So there's a lot of instability in the district and a lot of recognition, at least by the families and community members, including those who aren't necessarily raising children in the district, that there are egregious inequities. So this group formed a couple years ago to try and leverage a different voice and political resistance in the city to make change. And so they're an interesting group in that they toe a really interesting line between using grassroots tactics like marches, protests, things like that, and also activating like legislative spaces and lobbying. So part of what's really interesting to me overall is how they're able to do that and still be seen as credible, get the ear of, for instance, the mayor and pretty prominent political leaders in the city and so forth. So it's this combination of traditional grassroots, in-your-face tactics to kind of these being in official spaces with dialogue and having other kinds of strategies. And I think that they do all of that really, really well. So I connected with them about 1.5 years ago to start a research partnership. And also just more context to get to the design circle. We have a multiple case study. So my team is doing both an organizational study of the organizers and also doing participatory action research with them. So the design circles are nested within the participatory action research, but overall it's it's a big design. It's a complex study, but we're working it out. It's actually going pretty well. So this is our second year of data collection. And yeah, so I'll just pause, or I don't know if anyone has any general questions, and then I can get more specific into the design circle work.
Is there a particular issue or neighborhood or something that sort of sparked them coming together?
Well, the organizers come from 5 particular neighborhoods in the city, and some of that is, well, a lot of that is influenced by their foundation funding. So the foundation that has funded a lot of their work focuses particularly on 5 neighborhoods.
Okay.
But that's about it. So they are neighborhood based, and from that they have various types of campaigns for their organizing. And so for instance, last year a major campaign of theirs was to legislation that was under debate in Lansing, our capital, around the reorganization of Detroit public schools. So, but that was one of a few. That was just a major campaign, but they had others as well. And in terms of kind of our study of their work, we really focused on that effort. And but that coincided with us working with them to just get some PAR activities off the ground. So so I was kindly invited to join this collaborative at a really good timing when we were thinking about, okay, what do we do with this PAR element of the work anyway? And so, I thought there would be nice alignment between our PAR efforts and the design circle work. So that's been the connection and framing for us. And so we've had 2 of the 3 circles. And the first one focused on coming together at the beginning of the school year to reflect on the work of last year. So last year, the group really wanted to focus on, or actually explore, issues of special education and special education inequity and access in Detroit. Special education is not an area of my content expertise, but I think it worked fine because I think our connection with the group, and it was really around methodology and thinking about PAR and what that PAR means and how we each do these roles and how they can explore these contexts and get helpful information. So that's what we did last year. So our first design circle was really reflecting on that work, the rewards and challenges of it, talking about where they wanted to go next, etc. And so what I've heard strongly from them and what design circles have started to respond to is their desire, and this is their words, for training and workshops, more specifically around research skill development. And so our second design circle focused on interviews, and we talked about in each of the design circles we've talked about what skills and areas of knowledge they already have as community organizers, which I think is tremendous, and how those knowledge and skills can kind of translate or bridge to more formal research skills. And so, for instance, with our second design circle, we talked about their work doing one-on-ones, which is engaging legislators or other folks that they're trying to compel and convince to support a campaign. The skills that they use with that in dialogue and thinking about conveying a narrative, how that can relate to doing an interview. And we have our third one coming up, and I'm having a conversation with them on Friday to see exactly what they want to do with it. But we may get into focus groups, or we may talk about the one big desire of theirs is to get more clarity on how they use data, like how do we use certain data for what purposes? Like, when is it best to use survey data versus qualitative data? And these are their questions to me. And how do we know when data is good? How do we know when data is credible? Those type of questions. So that's kind of the overall context of our design circles, and some of the tensions that have arisen and that Ann and I have talked a little bit about is like ideal meets reality. so the ideal is that, you know, we come together in these design circles and everything's communal and collaborative and organic and so forth. And we've had lots of, like the majority of our interactions have been like that. But as I said, with these design circles, they have explicitly asked me and my team to deliver a training, right? And so that doesn't look as organic and collaborative as the ideal. So the workshops as they've named them and preferred to name them, are definitely interactive in terms of pair share activities, storytelling activities, and things like that. But I am also presenting a part of that time. We have dialogue and question and answers, breakout groups, and so forth. But you could walk into that space and at times think that we are taking the lead as the university researchers. And so, you know, I continue to think about that and continue to think about how we have this time together where it is as collaborative as possible, and where I'm kind of leveraging the expertise that I do have and that they do want to benefit from, but also affirming and trying to invite their expertise and connections. So that's something that we're wrestling with. And I know that what we're calling design circles, and I've definitely voiced that terminology to them, but they kind of fall back on the language of workshops. I know that will continue into next semester for them, you know, for us. So while the 3 circles will fulfill University of Washington's request, this is ongoing work for us. So the tensions that emerge and the dilemmas are things that I am thinking about and wrestling with just overall for the collaboration and the study. You want to say anything else?
Do you mind if I throw in there a little bit of the conversation we had earlier too?
Sure.
Well, just that there's a sort of, I think there's an interesting question that runs, it's in Camille's design circle, but it's cutting across several of the other ones, is thinking about the relationship between community organizing and research. And how do we center community priorities, needs, interests in ways that also move the joint work forward and sort of foster a kind of mutual learning and leveraging of all the expertise in the room. And so we just have been, you know, we had a conversation about that as a sort of, I think a question that is emerging across multiple ones at a bit of a meta level, is trying to think about how do we develop relationships that you use the word, you know, Camille, I think that that go beyond the transactional.
Right.
Work.
Right. So with his notion of transactional, and I were talking before around these tensions, you know, I spoke of, again, on one hand, definitely wanting this to be as communal and collaborative as possible, but also I think I've started to wonder the extent to which we, as social justice-oriented researchers, can over-romanticize some things sometimes. And for them right now, for us to be helpful for them, they want like so-and-so delivery, they want presentation, they want like more explicit guidance, as opposed to a continuation of as many of conversations and reflections and dialogues that we've had. And so how to do that without falling into any kind of top-down approach, any kind of approach that is actually away from what we're trying to achieve in this with, kind of democratic practices and things like that is something that is always on my mind.
It's very interesting because we started in such a similar manner as that group, but it was 16 years ago. So the difference was that, and this is where I'm wondering, we can talk further another time, but there's so many examples in some of the grassroots organizing here in Oregon that we know about that we didn't use the words design circles, but we've tended to run a lot of collaborative meetings based on popular education where everybody's brainstorming what we want to do before we make the decision, and everybody gets to vote on what's the most important thing to have in whatever campaign, and that's been going on for years and years and years. Kind of, I don't know, over here it's related to farm workers and Cesar Chavez and that kind of stuff. So we get more into the Latino world as more and more popular education related. So we just have a lot of that here. And so it's really interesting because now what we're trying to use our design circles for is much harder, and I'm hitting the same roadblocks in a different manner, but it's this idealism versus reality. Since I'm trying to do something we haven't done, I'm not doing what you're saying. What you're saying is what we used to do, and now it's just it's very different. It's not easy. So anyway, it's really, really cool.
Thanks.
It makes me think about, so I've done similar kinds of things, right? Like trying to get at these processes. And to me, it sounds like it's also around negotiating, like where does expertise live? And whether we're after, and what's the end goal. For me, this is why design circles sometimes are different. And I come at it from a particular history, but there are often goals, like achievement milestones. But I've always thought about design circles, and the work that I've done for a while now is that the circles are actually capacity building. And that while I care about them getting to some achievable end, it's actually the capacity building and the sort of solidarities that come out of those experiences. And so like increasingly after ran many of these in Chicago for 15 years. Actually, now I'm starting to study, like, for the folks that participated in these over time, how have they continued to play out? And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, like, I think that the tensions you're talking about are really interesting in these moments of, like, if people identify, here are the expertise that we don't think we have, we need to get those expertise. And it's always this moment between figuring out how, I think potentially you might call research skills as kind of dominant forms of expertise. Like, what's the new ways of getting people increasing access and capacity to dominant knowledges without being dominated by them, right? And I think it's true for kids. I think it's true for adults, and figuring out that and knowing how to do that in generative ways often feels to me like the new territory. Right? That, because I think one of the things that, at least in my experience with lots of community organizing, there's always the 5 to 10 hotshot leaders who we all know they're cool. I'm not, but it does play out hierarchically again. Right? And so, and maybe that's okay. I don't always think that hierarchical leadership is necessarily problematic. It just depends on if you're a good leader or not, right? The question is whether it becomes cemented like that, or there are dynamic opportunities, right? And I think that the things that you're talking about feel like, okay, what's the dance of, if people want this expertise, great, but then what's the process by which it is transferred, right? So that you're not the one they call every time to say, come do this workshop again and again and again, right? And I think that part of the tensions for me about our design circles is that in the work that I've done, they're ongoing for years.
Yeah.
Right. And there's lots of milestones along the way. And I think one of the things for us, the challenge here is, and it sounds like you're already like, yeah, there's no way we'll get where we want to go in 4 meetings. And I think lots of people are starting to articulate this was a great beginning point, but there's like a lot of things that have to come after. Right. And actually that's a good indicator that if you can get people to keep doing it,
yeah,
that to me is a huge, huge indicator that you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing we've done just to talk to you and Megan about that is, I guess because of coming from the Latino world of, I don't know what to call it, Anne, you probably have a better word, but anyway, it's populist, I guess you could say, because it's all about, you know, the whole colonialism fight. And so Paulo Freire is this big philosophy. You know, we got a lot of different mixtures in Latin America, but especially in Mexican culture, and then Cesar Chavez, you get this whole popular education is everything that we base everything on. So we start out normally, and we're not doing this in the design circle. This is what's different, is the design circle we're doing is way different than what we normally would do. Mm-hmm. And what we normally do, just did it yesterday in another city, is to explain what popular education is and to talk about how really important thing is to recognize that everybody in the room has this wisdom and different types of knowledge. And the most important reason we do it, absolutely most important reason, is that normally the leaders that sometimes step in to lead everybody don't always have the background where they can say, I've suffered everything you've suffered. I'm one of you, I'm a you, and we're going to do this together. Instead, it's somebody coming in that hasn't really been in the same exact neighborhood. You know, you don't live in that neighborhood, or I'm not Latino, or whatever. So what we're saying is, I can design a great big campaign in my mind, you know, and political and legislative, and I can have everyone go testify here, and we can do all this stuff. But what is it that the people want and need, and are we even getting to what they really need, you know? And so every time I structure something where the parents start talking, these Latino parents, they may be not speaking any English, they're farm workers, they start talking about what their kids need in school, and it becomes like, okay, this is taking us beyond all the research you read in the books about what Latino kids need in school. And you're like, okay, learning something new every day, right? That's the whole point, that they know something I don't know, and that's the first thing I project, and that we all do here in our organizations that work with Latinos. So we're kind of like, we teach them that first, the philosophy, so that then they know that's why we want them to talk, not us, you know, like the reason why. And I guess teaching them about popular education and structures of philosophy, and it becomes not us just saying, hey, this is a great idea, let's do it this way, versus saying, there's this great big stuff that's been going on for a very long time with this guy who's a philosopher, and this is what it's about, right? And so we do all the structures and use those words from popular education. It was very interesting to me, because I don't know as much about it as the person who facilitates it, but I don't know. It sets a context that's different, and I don't know. But there's a lot behind that as far as what's motivating people to get involved versus the ones that don't. So stop telling stories there.
Camille, do you have kids in your group too, though? You're doing this intergenerationally, aren't you?
I am. So we have youth and adults, community organizers. And so the youth are secondary level, they're high school students on to early 20s is what they consider youth in their groups. And so in terms of active members, it spans like 14 to 50 something, the bulk of people. And then you definitely have some other elders who are older than that, a handful. So, and there's So it is intergenerational, which is really cool. And I also wanted to mention with your comment about hierarchy, so the group has kind of linked this design circle / workshop work with their train the trainer approach. So their idea is that this gets passed on. So here we are, this team from the University of Michigan, helping them develop these skills with more kind of formal research strategies and techniques. And they want to then pass it on to their members. And actually there is plans right now for them to schedule a meeting with their youth, one of their youth groups, to help the youth start thinking about how they do PAR. So that I think that's a good thing, right? It's already in motion. They are thinking about it that way. And one idea that was tossed out early on about a deliverable was a training manual. That idea came from the co-founder of the organization who has a leadership role. And so I imagine that other people might be on board with that, but I definitely want to have a more open conversation with him to generate ideas about what this deliverable is that everybody will feel good about. Yeah.
I find it very interesting. There's a lot of thoughts that are going in my mind. First of all, it sounds like a really interesting and fascinating project. So there's so many different things that are happening. So if I sound a bit incoherent, just kind of try to follow me through. Number one, the first kind of big thing that I'm thinking about is, I think it's exciting that they're asking you about research methodology, right? I'm kind of curious, like what's driving that? What's informing that? For me, that was kind of the big question that I put down, because I think that individuals want to, they're trying to build their capacity, but for what ends? Towards what purpose? What do they see this being? What is it going to give them? Does it give them more legitimacy? Does it give them more, the capacity to do something that's more research-based? Because you've got to remember within the context of Detroit, right? Detroit is like this, there's so many groups that have proliferated, over the past, 25, 30 years. Yeah, I just literally got an email from a citizen in Detroit, and they're all kind of using this language, right? A lot of these are connected to Wayne State, some of them from the Skillman Foundation, right. That are kind of using this language of the community, right? They're kind of using the community as a particular term to kind of as an entry point to galvanize and kind of push a particular agenda. And so I think that the community itself is a contested term, that the community is a contested term, that you kind of have seen it take on a really interesting form in many spaces. It reminds me of the work of the parentocracy work of Stephen Ball, or of Miriam David or Philip Brown, folks who are writing about parentocracy in the UK, and how that kind of emerged post Thatcher, and I think what's interesting is that you're kind of seeing kind of a very similar, parallel fashion, even though they were doing some work already, kind of trying to identify some parallels within the United States and educational policy. I think that what you're also seeing some the way it's developed and the way this kind of the community as a term has been appropriated by particular groups. You saw that in New Orleans, for example, and how they were utilizing and pimping the community, in so many words, and I think my sense is that this group that you're connected with now, they're feeling that these other groups might be more resourced, might have kind of these flashier, snazzier brochure, because they have more foundational kind of support. And so how do you compete with that? How does the community, that you're working with, gain legitimacy when everybody else is kind of supported by business interests in utilizing the name of the community, and they're the ones who are getting more attention. They're the squeaky wheel. So see all my thoughts?
That was helpful and super important question. So kind of the why research and even why us, why the partnership, is definitely around legitimacy, a desire for more legitimacy. So when I approached them about this, like potential partnership, collaboration, they were very much on board because they felt like not having a university partner was something that they were sorely lacking compared to a lot of major community organizers in other cities like Philadelphia or Chicago. And so part of it was, okay, well, we want to learn from you and we want to be resourced by you, in some ways that will give us more legitimacy, more credibility in the city, but with a genuine desire for their learning, right? So not just like the name attachment, but again, kind of going back to this questioning of theirs about how do we know what data is good? How do we know what data is credible? Them wanting to be taken more seriously and seeing inquiry or research to get data as a way to out of their desire to leverage more data to support their claims. So so for instance, this the CBO has a network of about 200 members, and of course a core of that is regularly active. And so, something they would say is something like we know this is true. we know from our lived experiences from each other that this is true, that this happens in the city, but how do we convince this legislator? How do we convince the mayor? How do we convince my neighbor who is so busy just trying to survive to join, this larger movement? And so wanting to partner with us to help them do that leveraging through research.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
I'm curious, now that you're saying it, and I'm wondering if it has something to do with the differences about, I don't know. So let me ask a question about, when I've done these before, there is also something not about legitimacy. That is something that there's a genuine, we need to learn something collectively together. Mm-hmm. The reason I'm asking if you would think a little bit about that. So I just did a series of these in Micronesia, for example, and an island where the grown-ups had a really deficit-based narrative of their kids. Mm-hmm. And I'm an outsider there, so I was like, okay, let's design around this. And then we left some things open. And it turns out all of the adult narratives of what they thought their kids would say were totally wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's one example. I've also done it in other places where, like, a lot in the communities that I'm from and I work in, while we might want teachers to do X, Y, and Z, actually so little teachers have actually done them that we're not even quite sure how they would work in the first place, right? So we have some high-level principles about what would culturally responsive teaching look like. And I'm just trying to give examples. And really it had to be a longer-term partnership because we had thoughts about what we wanted, but we didn't know because we've never done it before. And so there was really a genuine, like, well, what would it look like to do this effectively? What needs to be part of it? And how, and what's the right moves? And so I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit or think a little bit, and it might just be to riff about what the tension is between desire for external legitimacy, because that's a strategic research, which PAR is often about that, right? And then what's a kind of, is there a difference to you about a kind of need to learn about internally or from within community that might be just, I don't know, right? Those are different things. If I'm trying to convince something that I'm convinced that I know is true, and maybe we collectively have made sure we've checked ourselves, yes, it is true. And it's partly for me why it's really interesting intergenerationally, because I think sometimes, like, increasingly, I feel like there's really, young people often have different takes about what theories of change are or where levers of change need to be than 2-3 generations above them. So I don't know if there's a difference or there's a tension between sort of desire for legitimacy to external worlds and what do we need to learn internally.
So I see them just so deeply connected, and the way that it's voiced to me though is we need to learn more so we can be effective. Right? We need to learn more, kind of activate that learning, gain more legitimacy to be effective in influencing change in the city. So that's why I said their desire for more legitimacy absolutely comes with a genuine desire to learn. There's a way that I'm talking and thinking at the same time. Their desire, the voicing of the desire to learn is linked to the goal of being change agents. So, they're driven by getting something done, right? In terms of equity-oriented change in the city and for the schools. So I don't.
Well, it sounds like a process to me because, like Megan said, I really love the fact that you're working with Micronesians and they're talking about learning what their children actually think, want, need, That's really cool. There's a group here that we would love to work with if I ever had time, But anyway, so as we've gone along in our years, something that we've done is learn to have more and more focus groups, considering that kind of like a community needs assessment, but just focus groups. So we need to have the youth come present to the parents, But I feel like partly we've got a little bit of a, I can't think of the word, but we've got some things already set in place for us because we've got Latino youth groups who are organizing. We've got, the Latino Union that's organizing. We've got the Latino immigrant rights groups that are organizing, and then we're doing education. So we kind of use each other, But we've had the kids come several times to speak to parents, and it's always been extremely great, So maybe a suggestion just to say, hey, let's have some focus groups,
Focus groups with the aim of what?
Getting their, for example, listening to their kids, making sure that they, data, understanding the fact that data is both from a book as well as your own research, such as having a focus group with all the teens in the area, a focus group with another type of group, maybe I'm just making this up, like single moms or, whatever, right? Teachers' assistants, custodians, name it, I'm just making that up. But just, especially I just really like what you said, Megan, about the kids. It's just really important. Internal stuff like that.
So Camila, you also have, I noticed in reading some of the transcripts there, it's not only youth and adults, but they're actually children of some of the folks in the group. How do you think that's, how do you think that gets played out, or is that sort of, I don't know. I don't know exactly what my question is, but I think that there's an interesting space that that gets created when it's not only youth and adults, but actually children of the
adults. So that's kind of a wait and see thing for us, and so within the PAR space, the youth present. Well, two of the three youth that have been regularly present, 2 are family members of the adults present. One isn't, and I'm kind of waiting to see if she's going to come back to the space. But in their bigger kind of youth arm, it's really a combination. There are definitely it seems to be like that the major organizers, the kind of the prominent leaders of the organizers, so to speak, if they have school-age children, they're present in these organizing spaces. But there's definitely, I don't think that's the majority though. There's many youth who have been involved that whose parents or family members are not. And they're there independently. And so for instance, dozens of them participated in high school walkouts in the city. And those would include youth that don't have kind of family member affiliates. And so we're still trying to understand what that means, and we'll be getting at that also through our interviews with the youth. So I mentioned before about how this study is multifaceted, with PAR as one part, and there's an organizational case study. And so the focus of the organizational case study in this year 2 of data collection is around the youth, but it's still new. So we're still learning that part of it.
Question. Camille, I'm curious, you may, depending on, it sounds like it's an evolving process and things are still quite in motion, but I'm thinking about this concept of legitimacy, and if you've seen any evidence thus far of whether there has been kind of a feeling of increased legitimacy in the group, and or like how your team is thinking about identifying legitimacy down the line, like the feelings of legitimacy down the line, right? And I guess the crux of that question is like, how will you know that the group is feeling legitimized in community spaces? And have you seen any evidence of that thus far?
Right. Well, the key thing is we have to ask them, right, to see what they think and how they are defining that for themselves. But I can give you an example of a few indicators that have come up around influence, and whether influence and the extent to which it's with this idea of legitimacy we can talk more about. But so a few things I think about. One, they had a play, they did a play, both youth and adults did a play last school year. And it was during a time where legislation that they were lobbying for was being considered. And they did a play. There was 3 acts to this play, and each of the acts was kind of showing, it was to represent how much better things would be if you pass this legislation, right? So let's show like improved relationships between teacher and student. Let's show just different scenarios. So the mayor was present. And so that was a feather in their cap that the mayor came. First of all, so they had so that would signal that they are a credible group, worthy of his time and his ear in that space. Something that they talk about a lot is how they influence the discourse. So in Michigan, there's an annual meeting that's invitation only of very elite politicians and power players, and some of the presentations are recorded and publicly accessible. And between looking at like tapes of that meeting and also folks being interviewed, like these power players being interviewed in the media around the time that they were involved in this march, this 90-day protest or march, they could see some of these power players using language that they kind of initiated with them. So changing the discourse, like citing numbers that they shared with them, using the type of wording that they shared with them, typically not crediting them explicitly, but they don't really care about that. They're, they just want to shift people's perceptions and gain support. And so the extent to which that they see that in the media, like, okay, we met with the mayor 3 times to talk about this issue. Now all of a sudden the mayor is using our words, and citing the data that we introduced him to, on an interview with this, TV reporter, or at this policy meeting on Mackinac Island, so things like that are indicators that they will discuss and definitely seem to value. So those are a couple of examples.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's amazing. You guys, like, you've done a lot. It's really a lot. I feel like we're way in a different spot with this design circle, but I'll have my turn to tell you. I do want to ask you though, since they had so much going on already in your organization, when you came with the design circles, did you have a particular purpose that they chose? Like, we want to design a particular action or a particular reason why we're doing this?
So I'm trying to think. So some of the talk and asking around, or asking about help with skill development came before my involvement with the design circles. Yeah. So then when I came on board with the collaborative, it was kind of like, oh, this could be good timing, and we can kind of parlay these things together. So it was pretty seamless to them, I think. Yeah. So the organization formed their own research committee last school year, and that was after we started our research partnership with them. And so they were meeting monthly anyway, all of last year, around PAR and special education issues. And so there was already the plan to continue that structure for this year. And then the design circles happened. And so we just kind of married the structure and the purposes.
Okay. So have they identified any purpose to having for like the third one?
So it's a toss between focus groups, and this understanding and assessing the quality of data and how to use data. So I want to talk to them more.
Mm-hmm. So it's become about data, yeah. So that's the decision.
Mm-hmm.
Use the design circles to talk about a new strategy called using data, learning more about data. Well, I'm just trying to, frame it.
Yeah, right. And they have data. They have data from their activities last school year. So if we go with that, one suggestion I will have is that they bring that data to the table, and we actually look at what they have done and how we can make sense of it.
A deep dive, they want to.
I mean, it's worth kind of engaging them in some sort of dialogue, communication around what they really hope to accomplish through this, through these design circles, because I think what they're sensing is that they're seeing this kind of research methods training as some sort of means toward an end, right? I mean, and I think, what's the end? What is that end that they have in mind? What are they envisioning that this is going to lead towards? Because I do think that end, it's worth engaging them in conversation, that end may not happen through the research methods training that you're giving them. Mm-hmm. It's like you can go through these whole processes and they may still not achieve the end. So perhaps you might, like engaging them in some sort of conversation so that it's more bi-directional, because right now my sense is that they're just saying, like, here, we really need X, we need some training, and that's what we want you to do. Mm-hmm. And I think the space to engage them in that kind of dialogue about what do you hope to accomplish, what is it that you really, what is it that you're after, and maybe we should go after that. as opposed to after this thing that you think is going to get you to that. That might be kind of a different kind of way to engage that group in trying to shift that communication, so that the exchange becomes something that's more fruitful for them in the long run, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult. I've been where you're trying to convince people to go a certain direction and they want to talk about something else. And there's been a number of times it's like, okay, let's get together and talk about a campaign that we should have with the school board, because I saw something coming down the pike, or my husband did, and there's a bill that's going to come out because a petition by a really racist group is going to come up, and all of this is next year. And trying to do, okay, let's do a strategic planning for the year, and prepare what we want to do for a campaign. And it's people have something else they want to talk about, completely something else. And it's really hard to say, let's all do this together. And then you're like, well, I don't want to be just the leader that says, okay, here's what we're going to do, and you're going to follow us. So you're trying to figure out how to get everybody on the same page without telling everybody what to do. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting and organic, and it's back and forth, and it's really interesting. But yeah, it would be good if the third design circles, I just wonder, because sometimes we're just trying to do something like, let's try a design circle, but how different is it from what we've already been doing? And so what's what could we say? Well, let's try this process for something different and just pick this little pigeonhole of, let's try this for this particular little reason, see what happens, Right. But it's hard to get everybody to see what you're doing because they're not part of the research team. And then it's like, how can they pick something,
Right. Yeah. And I with, this conversation, I am thinking more about, going back and asking them, how can we integrate this discussion and these practices of research skills with the kind of content of a real campaign that you have right now that you're trying to, push forward. So it's not seen as different and so distinct, right? So how can we be talking through like real issues and having real examples, real data that you care about, that you're wrestling with, you try and marshal for change as we go through, these discussions and activities.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're surrounded, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Well, I was just going to say that for me, so before I was faculty, I was the director of education at Community Center, and I was teaching, but all of the folks involved in our research projects were actually community folks and not graduate students, and that they were both doing kind of the research team work, but also all the other things. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, it's been very difficult to have the same kinds of things emerge in design circles when I'm a professor now, and not in that place, or when I have graduate students as part of the research and not students that are. So I do think that piece that you just said is really critical, and I think it's connected to the thing that you said in the beginning, where the dynamic was, well, you're the expert in this, give us a workshop on this, right? Like there's a way in which that discourse creates the us-them kind of binaries that sometimes are okay, but like how do you disrupt those in generative ways? So I think, I feel like I've learned. For a while I had I just did the work for a long time in this way, and then becoming a professor made the work 85 million times harder, to be honest. Because even if I'm right, like it is the institutional differences that end up driving the relationships in this. Even if your relatives are part of the organizing groups, right? So I think that it's a really interesting tension right there. And it's curious. Like I also really love the idea of maybe you focus on how are they going to do the trainers, and think about what gets taken up there as the really important pieces. Because in some ways, right, that's like the context where you're not the power player, or the researchers are not the power players. It's So I think these are really good edge questions about how you take up these things in different kinds of ways. And And you could then start to think about, how do my DCs, you know, if I'm looking at that these folks are going to go out and do other things, that your outcome isn't so much what thing did I get accomplished at the end of the design circles, but how do I see these ideas live in activity after them?
Right.
And I think that that's also, I mean, I think that that's really a common thing and across a lot of design circles I'm seeing, is sort of there may be some product that gets created, but there's also through this process, what are the relationships and opportunities and ideas and agency or capacity that get built through that process.
So I have to go, but this has been great, and it's been nice to see and talk to you all. I imagine other folks probably have to go too. But.
Yes. Thank you very much, Camille, for sharing your work. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, Camille, that I completely believe in also that they want data and you help them get it is huge, because it's not easy to find if you can't find somebody that wants to work with you for free. You know, we've had to hire consultants before because we didn't know where else to get help, you know. So it's wonderful.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
It's just very hard to also, like Megan said, as a professor or a researcher, to also move to this part about, oh, let me see it sit in the back while you guys design something. And that's been very hard.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Camille.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.